Are we live? Are we live? I think we're live. We are live.
Live.
That's how every live stream starts, is with people wondering whether they're live or not. Hello,
Wait a minute.
Ben.
You didn't tell me this was going to be live, Jack.
Yeah. Well, you know now.
Oh, man. It will be a
Oh,
great disaster.
Ben, welcome to the Security Hazard. Are you excited?
I'm so excited, Jack.
Yeah.
Can't you tell by my face that I'm just
But you always look
radiating
happy. You
excitement?
always look happy. You're a very positive person.
I know, it's true.
That's how you've always struck me anyway. I'm sure underneath it's burning resentment and horrible feelings of disgust and awfulness. But on the outside, you're a very happy person.
Well, thank you for revealing that to all of our, millions of viewers and listeners. The inner horror that is Ben Page. Anyway, I'm Ben Page, stuffed with horror, and you are Jack Knoll.
Jack Knoll, overflowing with horror and awfulness. So I'm sorry to say.
Too bad. Such a
Too
shame.
bad. Too bad. But yes, this is our first episode.
It is.
Wow.
We're actually doing a show, Jack.
Yeah, which is funny because when we told our friends that we were doing a show, I believe they said, "Oh, I thought you already sort of did." Wasn't that their response? Something along those
lines. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm surprised you haven't done that already.
Well,
so
we're doing it
for those
now.
people, we're doing it now. And for those of you who didn't ask, sorry, you didn't ask, but you're getting it anyway.
Well, we're doing it now, and our lovely show even has a special intro which you have made, which is going to premiere right here. So let's play that now. It's a masterpiece.
Thank you. I spent, a whole hour, I spent all those minutes on it.
All those those 15 seconds that it played, that's how much time you spent on it. It all happened in real time.
It did, yeah. Much like, every film and television project. It just happens.
It just happens, and there's zero effort put into any of it. It all just plays off like, oh, it's easy. Trapped
this is
in
going
the
to
sky,
be
easy.
Just a dawdle mastered. This is our first ever tangent. But once upon a time, I had to make a video about kayaks. It was a kayak product video.
Okay.
And the filmmaker or the client wanted to know how long it would take me to film the video. And I said, well, how long does it take to install this product on the kayak? And they were like, well, it doesn't matter. You can just speed it up, right? And I was like, well, yeah, but I have to film it all before I can speed it up. That's the way that it works. So that's I don't know what that has to do with the Security Hazard show or the intro, but that was the intro. So welcome to the
Well, there we go. Welcome, everyone. Yes. Fantastic to have you here. Don't worry. Kayak-related stories will, I'm sure, I'm Gerry. Ben, you must have more than one kayak story.
Oh, of course I do. Of course I do.
I'm going to be calling upon that. But yes, welcome to the Security Hazard show. This is a weekly live podcast, basically, where me and Ben come along to talk about all things Gerry Anderson.
Crazy.
Which is crazy because obviously I've been doing the Security Hazard blog for a very long time now. And
almost 10 years, I think.
It's coming up on 9 years in May. So getting up there now. And I've done a podcast in the past for Security Hazard, which was Operation Anderson, which I did with my lovely wife, where I forced her against her will to watch the first episode of every Gerry Anderson series. We did that podcast.
We should point out at the beginning here that I am not, in fact, your wife. This isn't.
No, although I'm sure people will start to speculate about that. Although I'm probably the wife in this scenario. Anyway,
Why are you starting these rumors now, Jack?
let's not start. But anyway, we did the Operation Anthem podcast, and I always wanted to like reboot it, do a second season of it, like come up with a new way of kind of going about it. But in the end, we sort of decided, well, you know what, that mission of getting my wife to watch things is pretty much over. She has her own interests, which I think is fair enough. But I was like, I know who I can trick into watching Anderson stuff because he actually likes it. It's Ben Page.
Hi,
So
I'm Ben
Ben,
Page.
we're actually going to start off this. We are going to review Trapped in the Sky, the first episode of Thunderbirds, for this
Because
podcast.
how could we not? It would be
How could we
rude
not?
to.
It was the perfect place to start. But what I wanted to do first, actually, was have a little conversation about how we first got involved in this crazy world of Gerry Anderson productions and puppets and Super Marionation and all the wonderful things. And I'm sure Thunderbirds plays a big part in that. And so I wanted to just touch upon that, how we first kind of discovered these shows. Obviously, our experience is going to be quite different.
Yeah,
You know, you were watching in the US. How was that for
was.
you? How did you discover it all?
Yeah, it's kind of unusual. I'm 32, and that puts me sort of a little bit too young to be in the 90s revival.
Mm,
But like yourself, I was just squared up, teed up perfectly for the 2000s revival.
yeah,
But I don't know if you know this, the 2000s revival of Thunderbirds was not really a thing in the United States of America.
you
It
don't
was
say.
not a huge cultural phenomenon at that time in the US. But one of the things that they did do was they had the DVDs came out around that time. Thunderbirds came out on DVD. Stingray came out on DVD. I think all the Super Marionation shows in quick succession, along with Space 1999, UFO, and even Terrahawks were released kind of between 2000 and 2005, 2006, something like that on DVD. And as part of that, there was a broadcast of Thunderbirds from 2002 to 2003, maybe 2000, late 2001, something like that, on a channel called Tech TV. And Tech TV was a video game focused cable satellite channel. So it was not typical of their programming, but for some
Right.
reason they were like, let's put this show on. And I grew up in a very rural part of the United States, so I didn't always have access to cable or satellite TV in my childhood, but I did at that time, and just happened to be flipping through channels, stumbled across Trapped in the Sky, a funny quirk about the way it was broadcast on Tech TV, which those of you who watched it on Tech TV will remember this with fondness or great confusion. They showed it, rather than show an hour-long episode, they split it in halves, which was common in American broadcasts of Thunderbirds, to split the
Yes. Yeah.
hour-long episodes into half-hour chunks. But these half-hour chunks, for some reason in the programming block, they showed them back to back. So it was like a cliffhanger, like, will International Rescue save the day in part 2 of Trapped in the Sky?
Did they
And
actually have that
yeah,
narration?
they
Oh,
did.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a narrator doing that whole spiel where they led up to the end of the the halftime, and then immediately the second half would start. So
Build it all up and then immediately just okay. Well, yeah, great.
yeah, the other quirk, which is probably the most noteworthy part of that particular broadcast, is it had a trivia track, which was not optional. You could not turn it off. It was baked into the broadcast feed that
Okay.
provided little interesting tidbits and facts, and shall we call them quasi facts about Thunderbirds. They were
So what,
mostly
like
true.
captions that came up on the screen?
Little captions on the screen saying things like, I'm struggling to think of an example now. They would have little arrows that would pop up that would say, "Oh, here's the string that's doing this," and it would pop up on the screen and it'd be like, "There's the arrow," or like in
Don't say that. Don't say that.
they revealed all the secrets in
Yeah.
that edition, which actually, well, I'll get to that. But the first episode I saw was in fact Trapped in the Sky, so I am highly biased towards this. I have
Okay.
a very clear memory. I came upon Trapped in the Sky Part 2, so I didn't have
Ah.
much of the context of the first half of the episode. I knew the hood was a bad one,
Okay.
but not too much context. Just
And
mainly the rescue.
when you say you kind of stumbled upon part 2, was it you were channel surfing and you just happened to find it, or was
That's the
there
way that I
any knowledge
remember.
of the show at all before that?
None,
None.
zero, zip.
Wow.
I just liked the title. I was like, "Ooh, Thunderbirds sounds good."
Right. Well,
that
yes.
that was the pull, and I was so caught up in the drama of landing the fire flash that when it ended, I I stood up from the couch, walked outside, sat down on the steps leading up to the house, and just sat there in silence for several minutes.
You needed a moment to decompress
I needed a
all of
moment
that.
to
Wow.
decompress from the drama of Trapped in the
And
Sky.
you were how old?
I was 9.
9. Gosh.
I was 9 when I first saw
Okay.
that. And
Yeah.
I knew instantly, Jack. I was like, that's something that I want to be a part of.
All
I
right.
knew it from the very first moment. Thunderbirds was going to be a part of it. The whole like mise en scène of the like miniature world, the kind of like toys come to life aspect of it. I was just suckered in right away. And the trivia track, which I alluded to earlier, suckered me in even more because prior to that, I had
Great.
only wanted to be an actor because I wanted to be involved in movies. I loved movies and I loved TV shows. So I wanted to be part of that. And for a kid, the only way you can be part of that world is to be an actor, right?
Right.
But
Because you
that was
don't
like,
know the full extent of all the other
exactly. You
roles
don't
that
know
go into
anything
it. Yeah.
about the other roles. But here was a literal guide on my television screen pointing out to me where different roles had been played, like, and
Amazing.
telling me who people like Brian Johnson was or
Yeah.
Derek Meddings, So it was the behind the scenes part of it was an immediate allure for Thunderbirds
Yeah.
right from the beginning.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Oh
that's
my
what hooked
goodness.
me, and I discovered the rest of the Gerry Anderson show because they had ads for the A&E DVDs. Did not have a DVD player at the time. Scrimped and saved until I could get one, and yeah, been watching Gerry Anderson shows ever since.
Yeah.
What about you, Jack? What first
I
caught your eye
I
about?
wish my memories of it were that clearly defined. I was that much younger, of course, because obviously in the UK it was everywhere, and as you alluded to, I was at the age where um it had been on in the 90s and had the big 90s revival, and my older brothers had grown up with that and enjoyed it and gotten into it, and bought the Tracy Island and all the rest of it. And then I came along, just a miracle popping into the world,
Exactly.
and I would have been four years old when the digitally remastered versions of the episodes were broadcast again on BBC Two. But I don't think it actually started there. I think we had a few VHS tapes in the house. I want to say Thunderbirds in Outer Space, the Super Space Theater compilation movie, would have been the first time my eyeballs were exposed to Thunderbirds. But I would have been so small I wouldn't have even comprehended it really. So it's just one of those things that's always been there. But definitely those VHS tapes got a lot of play. So when the show actually was being broadcast on TV, I also remember sitting down to watch Trapped in the Sky, being about 4 years old. And first scene, the hood comes up on screen, gets very, very angry. I kid you not, such cliche, but I literally did hide behind the sofa. That,
Wow.
and I know people say that as sort of alluding to that general feeling. No, I literally did hide behind the sofa because it was terrifying, and I stayed behind that sofa pretty much until the end. But oh boy, was I was watching, I was watching, but I was a bit freaked out by the hood, and that was a theme that actually continued. I remember all the way through watching every week. You know, a new episode would be broadcast, and I remember that feeling not really going away until they got to Cry Wolf. By the time they got to Cry Wolf and the hood pops up in that, I was like, I can just about handle this now. I probably would have been about a year older by the time that happened, so it kind of came around. But yeah, the as I got more into it, more VHS tapes started appearing in the house. We used to frequent car boot sales quite a lot, and you'd always be able to pick up a VHS tape for like £1 or something, probably less than that actually. And so my VHS collection just started growing. We also did not have a DVD player in the house, so, and also DVD box sets at that time, my goodness me, did they cost they cost a lot of money. I think when Thunderbirds first came out, it was like it easily, I think it was over £100 easily. So that was just like, that is just a luxury item we cannot afford. So for me, it was Channel 5 VHS tapes, collecting all of those up. And then they started, I literally remember the moment they started broadcasting. From what I can remember, BBC Two stopped showing Thunderbirds and started showing Stingray. And I remember I've told this story before, but I remember being very, very upset that Thunderbirds wasn't on anymore and that this new show, Stingray, was there in the TV listings instead, in the newspaper at the time. And just being really upset about that. And my mum, obviously knowing better than I, turned around and said, I think you'll like Stingray. Give Stingray a try. It's similar. Don't worry, it's similar. Sure enough, sit down to watch Stingray, and it's amazing. So I get swept up in all of that, have the VHS tapes and all of that for that show as well. Same thing happened with Captain Scarlet, although Captain Scarlet was odd because at first I distinctly remember I had a friend at school who said, oh yes, I know all about Captain Scarlet. It's about a pirate who sails the seven seas. That kid was talking absolute tosh. Clearly never seen Captain Scarlet before and was just trying to act like he knew what he was talking about. Anyway, so yeah, over the years, just collected more VHS tapes. Like you, started reading up about the behind the scenes, and as I got, you reach that point with the Anderson shows where obviously you realize it's all make believe, and that you're not going to be a Thunderbird one day, to quote the 2004 movie, which also would have played a big part in. But that's a whole other story.
That's a story,
which you can watch on this very YouTube channel.
On this YouTube channel, there's a 6-hour introduction to that story.
Exactly. So yeah, started collecting up the DVDs and learning more about how the shows were made, and reached that transition point where it's sort of like, okay, it's not make believe, and the story aspect, although gripping and fantastic in the way that it is, I became more interested as I grew older in how are these shows made, and realizing that there was a fantastic story behind all of that. So as I started to collect DVD box sets of things like Supercar, the thing that actually really drew me in to the shows was the behind the scenes documentaries, stuff like the Full Boost Vertical documentary that was on the Supercar box set. That got a lot of watch time because it was like, these are the people who actually did it, and they're telling the stories, and they get into really fine detail about, I remember when we were filming the Supercar episode Icefall and we used real blocks of ice. I love that story. there's just things like that. And so, yeah, just started accumulating more and more and more of this knowledge. And the internet happened at just the right time as well.
Yeah, we're very
So,
fortunate to be fans during the time of the internet, just
yeah,
because, especially those early days of the internet, where it was kind of pre-social media. If you wanted to be involved in the community, you had to join a forum or something
yep,
like that.
yep.
Eagle Transporter,
Remember
shout
when
out.
websites had guest books? You'd
Yeah,
sign the
yeah.
guest book when you went and visited a website. Oh, it's
Oh,
so
yeah.
novel. I love that though.
I think I can still be found on some Gerry Anderson guest books if you
Yeah,
know where to look.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I remember sites like Austin Tate's supercar website. Obviously
Stuff.
the BBC, because the BBC had their own pages dedicated to Thunderbirds and Stingray and stuff.
Yeah.
There was the official Thunderbirds website as well. Actually, thunderbirdsontline.com, I think, was a thing.
Yeah.
All stuff that on dial-up internet connection didn't work very well, so you had to really work for it.
Oh man. Yeah. If you
Not
wanted
like
something on
now.
the internet in those days, yeah, it's a weird balance between what you had in the 60s and 70s and 80s, which was and maybe to a certain extent the early part of the 90s revival. If you wanted information, you had to really, really work for it. You had
Yeah,
to, find a copy of TV 21 that had the answer to your question, or a copy of
right.
SIG magazine.
Or you would,
But
yeah, I was going to say SIG, you would write a letter to the fan club, all that sort of
right,
stuff. The amazing thing is that hangovers from all of that do still exist. If Anderson is still
yeah,
around, and what Anderson Entertainment does now builds upon that as well, like just engaging the fan community. And that's, I really started getting involved in that fan community when I was 15. I went to my first Fanderson convention in 2010. That's where I met Andrew Clements, Chris Thompson, and formed friendships that have lasted out to this day, and have just been fantastic
it's a beautiful
for
thing.
me. And that was really important. Again, I was at that right age where that happened, where I was like 15, and for all intents and purposes, I could have just kind of done away with Thunderbirds and Gerry Anderson and sort of said, well, that's a kid thing, I'm not going to get involved in that. But finding a community of people who were enthusiastic adults doing amazing work, analyzing these shows and writing about them, telling their own stories, doing all of that sort of stuff. The fact that I found that at the age that I did meant that I just continued growing up with it. And here we are now doing a podcast all about it. And in that same spirit, that's what I've always wanted with Security Hazard, is to capture that same slightly, slightly, and I think it's a fair word, like that cult-like feeling of it, where it's like a few people who are just absolutely dedicated to the topic and want to learn more. And just to those people, I say hello, and you are very welcome here. We love having you here.
Thanks so much.
But yeah, I think that's
feel free
my
to leave your own stories in the comments below.
yes.
Or if you're listening to this after the fact, send them in to us. Jack, where's the best place for people to leave
We have an email address. It is sec.hazard.pod@gmail.com.
sec.hazard.pod
@gmail.com. Yep, there it
Brilliant.
is. So yeah, send in your emails. Yes, we'd love to hear those stories. We also, in preparation for our Trapped in the Sky review, which we are about to come to, we had some amazing comments come in from people across all the social media,
I know,
letting us
how
know their
incredible is that?
thoughts. I know. I was very surprised. Honestly, I was expecting no one to be watching this. So thank you so much to everyone who has sent in their comments. We are going to read those out. Ben and I are going to do our review, and then we're going to hear some of our viewers' thoughts on this broadcast spectacular. So
I'm very excited.
Shall we officially shift gears into our segment?
Yeah, it's about that time. You better do it before your dog leaves her own review of Trapped
You did
in the
hear
Sky.
that. I was just checking that you did hear that. Yeah,
It
sorry, my
sounds like
dog.
she's giving her own thoughts.
My dog does not respect the boundaries of live broadcasting whatsoever. So
Ridiculous.
there you go.
Shameful
But
conduct.
here we go. Our review segment is called Special Assignment because whenever we take on one of these reviews, we feel like we've been set a special assignment. So it has a special introduction. It's made by Ben Page, and it goes a little bit like this.
I have received a report from Spectrum Intelligence. It will mean I have a special assignment for you.
Oh, beautiful.
But it's a sewer.
We'll need a team.
I hope you will forgive me.
I love that so much.
It's a great look for you, Jack.
When you sent that
Doctor
over, when you
style.
sent that over to me, I was just like, "Oh, he gets it. He knows."
Expect more bad photoshops in the weeks to come.
Yes. The goal is that we're going to have all these little segments that we're going to do on a recurring basis, and they're all going to have their own sweet little introductions like that. And well, I think that was a great way to start. So, Ben, we're talking about Trapped in the Sky, but we thought it'd be too easy just to do a review of Trapped in the Sky and just talk about it. So, I have come up with some words which are used quite often when people talk about this episode. And certainly they came up in our viewers' comments as well. There are certain words that come up when people talk about Trapped in the Sky. And I feel like we can do a little better than that. So what I have done is come up with a list of words that you and I are not allowed to say in regards to Trapped in the Sky. And I'm going to bring them up on screen now, as well as a scoreboard. I'm going to be keeping score. If either of us say any of these words during our review, then, well, we're going to get that marked against us. And we should probably have some sort of forfeit at the end of that. What sort of thing do you think would be appropriate?
Ooh, a forfeit? You mean if we say them too many times?
I don't know. If whoever says them more, I suppose.
Well, definitely the person who says them the least. I think the person who says them the most deserves to, or will get to buy the other person some Lego. How about that?
I'm all for that. Yeah, definitely. I'm all for that. All right, that's a fair agreement. So the words are action, bold, classic, first, iconic, masterpiece, padding, television, tension, and just for a bit of fun, Commander Norman is also in there. You're not allowed to refer to that character by name from this point onwards.
Right. From here on out, it's Mustache Man.
I was thinking more of just referring to him as the airport controller, but you could call him the Mustache Man if you want to. So we're going to have to be good about this because I'm going to have to try and listen to both of us and try and keep the score up to date. And this is where people in the chat might be able to help us out as well.
Don't let us get away with anything, people in the chat.
Yeah, we have to be good. If you hear me say something, try and call it out, and I'll try and do the same for you. And I'm sure the score will end up being totally inaccurate, but because some of these words, some of them are going to be difficult to avoid.
Yeah, I'm going to be
nevertheless
struggling for synonyms over here.
Exactly. But here we go. I have got my notes in my lovely Lady Penelope notebook.
Very nice.
So
I just have my phone.
Let's begin.
But I also have this.
So, Trapped in the Sky was premiered on the airwaves in the UK anyway on the 30th of September 1965 on ATV Midlands. But it was actually first. Oh, dang it. I said first.
That was so early, Jack.
That was so early. You see, this is really difficult. It was initially shown actually on Dutch airwaves on the 15th of September. And that,
Right.
we believe, is where it got its worldwide premiere. But obviously we weren't around for that. As you say,
No.
you initially saw it on that channel, which begins with tech.
Mhm.
And I can't say the rest of it. And I would have seen it on BBC Two in 1999. So very different kind of first. I said it again. Very different debut experiences of it that we had.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop talking now and let you do some talking. Where would you like to start?
Well, let us start prior to the second thing. Dang, this is hard.
There's
With
one word
the-
that's making this really, really difficult here, but I think it's important.
With the opening titles.
Okay. Which are unique to this episode, of course.
They are.
What do we think of sound effects over the teaser?
I am actually not opposed to that. I think it's sort of a dead giveaway when you hear the Thunderbirds theme on CD or in a YouTube clip or something of that nature. It's 9 times out of 10 they've stolen it from this episode, and you can tell because of the sound effects.
And you hear those sound effects. I've got to say though, I don't hate it. Although it's different from every other episode, I think it does work.
It does.
I think it does work. It does add a sense of drama to it, hearing Carano scream
It does.
for the beginning of the episode. It does give it a certain unique flavor to it, that's for sure.
Certain pizzazz.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the highly memorable countdown of the 5 Thunderbirds.
Yeah.
That begins with a dramatic. I'm choosing my words with great care.
Yeah.
A dramatic countdown from Peter Dineley. We believe.
We're fairly confident it's Peter Dineley. There's arguments to the contrary, but I'm pretty sure it's Peter Dineley. I don't think there's much question about that at this point.
It's such a strong way to begin a television show.
Oh,
I said television.
You said television. The reason I put that word in there in the first place is because, as Lou Gray said, this is not a blank series. This is a feature film.
It is.
So I thought, well, let's honor that interpretation of it and ban that word.
Well, I'll definitely be shaking my fist at Lou Grade for that pronouncement throughout the course of this episode, because I'm sure I will say that forbidden word again.
Yeah. So,
Jack, what do you think of the concept of kind of spoiling the episode a little bit by having a bunch of clips?
Oh, I think it's genius. I think it's absolutely genius, particularly because it obviously goes by so quickly. You don't really take in. You don't get a full sense of this is what the story's going to be. Obviously, you're watching Thunderbirds, so you know there will be some sort of disaster going on. I don't think there's any question about that. So the fact that you get to see roughly what that is, particularly, and I think this actually probably worked in its favor during the repeat runs, was the fact that people could get a sneak preview of what the episode was. They know, oh, I've watched this one before, or oh, this is one that I haven't seen before. That actually, I think, works in its favor. It adds a little bit of excitement to it. At least that was always a novelty for me when I was growing up watching it. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
But yes,
I was concerned with spoilers.
You
at
were?
when I watched it prior to my second viewing.
Yeah.
But subsequently, it has not concerned me at all.
Yeah.
And I think
Well, because you know at this point, don't you?
Yeah, and it spoilers don't concern me as much as they used to, because they don't necessarily detract from the enjoyment. Everyone knows that the Titanic is going to sink, but how is the Titanic? How did it sink, and how did the people feel as it goes down? That's what makes Titanic a movie. It's what makes it of interest. So
Yeah.
knowing the specific details that Fire Flash is going to crash. Well, did they make it out? Did they survive?
Yeah,
all of
there's a
those
lot of
dramatic
extra details that you still don't know about, and that's what makes you want to find out those things. So they're very, very cleverly edited.
It's a teaser, not a spoiler, is what it is.
Exactly. Yeah. And then very important for this debut episode is getting the rundown of who all the characters are and which Thunderbirds they're in control of. But of course, we don't actually see all of them in I almost said the A word. We don't actually see all of them at work in this particular installment.
No, neither the machines nor the brothers, in fact, or the characters.
Yeah, not really. It's not. I think I do find that interesting because so many Anderson pilot episodes try to squeeze in all the elements at once into that pilot episode. So it's kind of interesting to me that they didn't take that approach with this one and decided, well, we'll just focus on Thunderbirds 1 and 2 and Scott and Virgil for now, but we'll bring in those other characters in later episodes and let other writers explore the potential stories that could be told there. So I think that works. I think if they had tried to somehow squeeze everything in to Trapped in the Sky, that would have been a struggle.
It would have been very cluttered, I think.
Yeah.
To try to cram it, which is sort of a problem that some adaptations of Thunderbirds have had, trying to squeeze in every element from the TV show.
Yeah. It can be done, but you need the right platform and the right type of story to make that work. It works in a longer format.
Growing up, I assumed that the order of the Tracy brothers was the order of their age.
You're opening this can of worms.
Chronologically from oldest to youngest. But I've discovered, as an adult Thunderbirds fan, becoming more involved in the Thunderbirds community, that not everyone agrees with that idea.
They don't agree, and they're very welcome to their opinions. I personally, the thing is, it doesn't affect my enjoyment of the show either way. It's kind of what it comes down to. Like I know some people, really want to get to know these characters, and I was the same when I was growing up. I really wanted to get to know those characters. But then I think as I learned more about the production and the way that Thunderbirds was made, and how, to be honest, how little regard the producers and the script editors and the writers had for sticking to that information, the more I just learned, look, there are other things to focus on here. But birth order, I honestly don't have a strong opinion. Because the question is whether it's John or Virgil who's second oldest, isn't it?
Right, I think so.
Yeah.
The reason it was significant to me was because I grew up in a family of all boys also.
Yeah, well, so did I, yeah.
So looking at the age order, I was able to identify myself in the grouping, and
Okay.
also the kind of aspirational figure. My favorite was Scott as a child
Mm.
because he was the oldest, and I aspired to that position of
Seniority.
seniority. Yeah.
Yeah, you see, I would have been an Alan because I was the baby, but I didn't want to be in that. I didn't. I didn't see myself reflected in Alan Tracy very much, so that's probably why birth order didn't impact me whatsoever.
Yeah.
But fair enough. People who want to consider that. So, episode opens proper with the hood. As I said, I went and hid behind the sofa at that point as a kid. And the reason why is because it's a scary scene. Not even with his eyes lighting up or any of that stuff. Just the sheer fury behind the character at that point absolutely terrified me. I had never seen anyone be that angry before when he kind of lets loose on Carano. When will international rescue start operating? It's really strong. And so I was wondering, do you think that this episode is the best version of the Hood that we saw? Or did he have stronger performances later?
Ooh. That is a great question. I enjoy the Hood as he appears later as kind of more of a comedic relief character.
Okay.
I enjoy when he gets to be a bit silly, almost as much as I do when enjoy his character when he's scary. So as far as the scary Hood, I don't think he's ever scarier than he is here.
Okay. See,
However,
I would argue that Desperate Intruder is maybe him slightly more unhinged.
That's a good point.
Because he's burying people in the sand and blowing up temples to crush and kill people. You know, he maybe I mean, the title of the episode, Desperate Intruder, sort of implies that he's on the edge.
But
there,
he is
in a way
torturing
that
his own family, his own flesh and blood here.
yeah.
So there is
Well,
that
he
aspect.
hypnotizes Tintin in Desperate Intruder as well, and
True.
that's sort of the family connection is alluded to there. But yeah, so I would maybe say Desperate Intruder takes it up a notch in the scary direction, and I think that works well. The problem with the scale of international rescue is having just one man who's trying to take on all of that is it can go in towards comedy, which it does. But when they do actually present the Hood as a credible threat, I think it's interesting. I think the distance that's kept as well between the Hood and international rescue, the fact he never really has any direct interactions with the Tracy boys or anyone like that, kind of makes him, I don't know, this just distant figure. So that when in Desperate Intruder he actually does start interacting with brains, it's a little more scary. Whereas in Trapped in the Sky, he's a remote figure. He's just kind of, dare I say it, to use a cliche that isn't on the list, he's kind of pulling the strings a little bit in this. He's trying to manipulate international rescue into turning up for the rescue. And
I will say I'm glad that he didn't appear in every episode. It was always a nice bonus when the Hood was there.
Yeah. It meant that they could tell a broader range of stories.
Exactly.
I think it's really important that they did do that. Now, I will say, I think that they definitely intended to use the Hood more.
Sure.
I think the reason why he's set up in such a big way in Trapped in the Sky is because they thought that there was potential there, in the same way that they had Titan in Stingray. You know, they felt, well, this is going to be our main villain, so he will come up more and more. But obviously, they started to realize hey, we could actually do more with our stories if we don't try and center them around this one villain character and actually do more with it. So yeah, I think
Well, we've already reached the elephant in the room, which is the huge setup of the Hood Kirano subplot, which then does not play a big role in the
fizzles
show.
away. Yeah, fizzles away. Sadly, I mean, the thing is that the more you probe at that, and the more you try and ask questions about, wait, why does Kirano not just tell the Tracys about this situation? Why is he being so secretive? You know, isn't Jeff going to get suspicious that the Hood that Kirano keeps falling over screaming? You know, there's going to be all these questions that start coming up if you do it too often. So, although it has a lot of interesting potential, it probably would have gotten in the way of, again, the broad range of stories that they could tell. So I think it naturally just had to sort of die away into the background. But it is an intriguing prospect, and I know that, again, fan fiction and comic strips and all sorts of things have come along since and tried to tell more of that story, and I think that's fair enough. But for a oh no, I was going to say that word, for a every other word escapes my mind right now. For a I'm going to say it, for a television series, and I'll take that hit. For a television, I just said it again. For a series, I'm doing really badly on this. For a series that is intended for a family audience, for a broad, that the focus is not on psychological drama. That's not what we're aiming for here. So it kind of makes sense that they would just tuck that subplot away. I think it was a great idea.
It comes along at such an interesting time in broadcast visuals, because there was a kind of a push to put more family-friendly shows in primetime slots.
Yeah.
So you had, around 1964, you had the Flintstones becoming a big hit in the primetime slot. And because people were sharing their televisions, they weren't going off to different rooms to watch TV separately. Sorry, I think I've said it twice in there. I'll take 2 points, please.
Okay.
Because they were all in the same room, watching the same broadcast media. Everything sort of had to appeal to everyone in the audience. So there had to be a bit of psychological drama to appeal to certain members of the audience, and there had to be certain amounts of adventure.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good word for it.
To appeal to a different demographic. So it works because it's appealing to different. They're really going for a prime time audience here.
Yeah.
They're really trying to make it work for as many different age groups, as many different people in the audience as possible.
Yeah. And of course, this actually kind of brings us to the hour-long format, because I feel like that was the next step.
Another elephant in the room.
It was the next step to elevating it up to more of a primetime slot, was making it an hour long. Now, this is where I get to wag my finger at myself mostly, because the fantastic Discovery. So, okay, I should wind back here.
Rewind.
The story goes that the first block of episodes for the series, and I realize I've said first, and I've just
this is going to be an incredibly difficult story to tell without using the words that you've
I know. I know. But anyway, the initial block of episodes were completed as half-hour stories. And so the story goes that Trapped in the Sky was screened to Lou Grade by Gerry Anderson, and Lou Grade's response to that was, Gerry, this is not a typical broadcast medium series.
This is the exact quote from Lou Grade here.
Yeah. Roughly, I think this is how it goes.
That's how he said it exactly.
This is not a series. This is a feature film. Go back to your studio and make all the episodes an hour long. And therefore, the process went underway of extending the initial episodes to bring them up to an hour-long format while also making new hour-long episodes. And that was the accepted version of events. That Trapped in the Sky started as one of those early 25-minute stories. And indeed, when I wrote my blog article about Trapped in the Sky and reviewed the whole episode, I was
about 9 years ago.
Just about 9 years ago, I was going through, examining the footage and going with generally accepted norms of saying, well, this part was added to the episode later, whereas this part was probably in the original 25-minute cut. And, I made my claims and put them out there, and by and large, people responded well and thought that was all very well researched and well considered.
Yes, you were very clever.
Yeah, well, I thought I was.
Very thoroughly.
Yeah.
And then...
But in Thunderbirds fashion, there was a twist that came along. When the wonderful people at Century 21 Films have been doing amazing work recovering original film material used in Thunderbirds from anywhere from, little cut film trims to whole early prints of certain episodes. And it became apparent in their research that in all likelihood, Trapped in the Sky actually wasn't a 25-minute episode. It was actually probably finished as an hour long because of things like, and we'll get to this in a moment, but things like the TX-204 is a subplot of the episode that everyone always assumed, well, that was the part that was added later because it has no real bearing on what happens later in the story. But there are effects film trims that clearly show the TX-204 being used as part of the original shoot for Trapped in the Sky in September 1964. So therefore, we have to assume that was originally part of the episode. And you kind of get down to it and you go, you know what? It's really difficult. If you're going to leave the TX-204 in, what else can you cut out from this episode to bring it down to 25 minutes? And then the early work print of it was discovered, which is believed to be the earliest print of the episode. And it has interesting anomalies like the TV. Okay, are we saying TV? I'll take the hit on that one and say that we can't shorten that word to its commonly accepted abbreviation. That like the portraits, the way that effect was achieved was done differently and things like that. So anyway,
which is fascinating. If you haven't seen the video,
definitely go to Century 21 Films' YouTube channel, and they have a whole series called Thunderbirds Unseen. Go and take a look at that because it's very, very interesting dissecting those early work prints and getting an understanding of how those early episodes were actually pieced together and how they were in some cases extended, but in some cases, in the case of Trapped in the Sky, it seems to be that it was an hour long always. And it puts a completely different spin on how we understand this episode.
Definitely.
Did I explain that well enough?
It's a great explanation. Thank you.
The point is that everything in my Security Hazard blog review is now conjecture, and it may be false conjecture. So, I'm just going to put that out there, that do not take my words as gospel.
No, this is not the Security Hazard gospel hour.
No,
It is just
no.
the Security Hazard Show.
It is just
Nothing-
two guys
nothing that happens here.
speculating, and that is all we can do, is speculate
all
to
of
the best
it.
of our knowledge, and we're very welcome to being corrected as well.
Highly unofficial speculation.
But yeah, how does that? I don't know. How does that? I assume that you thought the same way, that originally, yeah, this must have been 25 minutes, and then it was extended later. How does it?
I never
change your
knew. I
interpretation
never
of it?
knew watching it that it never occurred to me, because it was split in half to begin with. It never occurred to me that it would have been an hour originally.
Mm,
It just
I
never.
suppose that does put a different spin on it. Yeah.
It also, it doesn't feel as slow when you divide it that way. If you take it in increments, you don't feel the weight of any extensions that may
Mm.
have been added to the 25-minute versions. So
That's it.
it wasn't a huge part of the story to me.
Yeah.
And I was never entirely clear until I read your blog which ones were the ones that had or had not been extended.
Yeah.
There was some question in my mind that I had never bothered to settle.
The way I think the way that Gerry has always told the story is the initial 9 episodes had been completed, and there were 2 others currently in production when
Right.
the declaration was made that everything's going to be an hour, and that's sort of the cutoff point. But the line gets blurred when you start to take in things like episode 12, Perils of Penelope, and episode 13, Terror in New York City, where it's like they have 2 directors, and there was obviously a point where those episodes were extended. The broadcast order plays into it as well, because those 2 episodes were then moved towards the beginning of the series. And then also things like episode 2, Pit of Peril, we know again from Century 21 Films' work that some changes were made there during production. So it's all just anyone who thinks that there's a clear-cut answer to any of this stuff, you're wrong. there is no clear answer to what was shot when.
There is a clear answer, but we don't have the production paperwork handy to confirm or deny.
If there was paperwork. Because I can totally imagine they were just like, oh, what are we shooting that day? Oh, just bring that set in, bring that puppet in. And I mean, maybe it was more thought out than that, but
I will say, when you're behind on a deadline making a film, the paperwork and the order of events is often out the window.
Yeah. I agree with that.
It's true.
Anyway, we went on a fantastic tangent there
that was
to
beautiful
explain
tangent.
some
very
things.
well
But
explained.
I'll try and bring us back on track and ask you, why is Fireflash such a beautiful vehicle?
Oh man, why is Fireflash such a beautiful vehicle? There was so much energy in the air at that time about supersonic travel because of the development of the Concorde that was happening. So there's I think that enthusiasm underpins a lot of the design that went into Fireflash. And allegedly, the same team that would have worked on this would have done a demonstration film of what the Concorde might look like. For I believe for investors was the purpose of the film.
I'm not familiar with that story,
that
actually.
film,
it's interesting.
Yeah, Gerry told a story in a few documentaries about working on the Concorde promotional film. And the film itself, it was kind of one of those believed to be maybe possibly a myth or a misremembering. And I think it was Century 21 Films also who uncovered a piece of film that might have been, but it's not confirmed.
Right.
They worked on that.
Amazing.
So there is that whole wonderful energy of supersonic air travel, which is now sadly no longer a reality. This is a series made in color at a time when black and white was very much the norm on
Yeah.
broadcast
Mhm.
media.
Very well done. Very well done.
And they make excellent use of color.
Yeah.
The blue shades of Fire Flash are lovely.
Yeah.
And don't blend in too much with the background, which you would think with a blue aircraft.
I was going to say, I would have thought they would have been quite concerned about that, but no, I guess maybe their lessons have been learned with Stingray. Like, you know, these we actually don't need to worry too much about
the
colours
white
blending too
lines,
much.
white panel lines in the black nose cone give it some nice definition. It is, you're right, it is a beautiful aircraft.
Yeah.
It
I'm
looks
like I'm not surprised that many people choose it as their favorite guest vehicle, because it does make a striking impression. I think that's one of the reasons why Trapped in the Sky works so well as a taster of what's to come with Thunderbirds, is that it starts strong with a guest vehicle that really matters. And when you consider all the other things that Derek Meddings and that team would have been worrying about as far as vehicle design, and Bob Bell on the set design as well, all those things they would have been considering, the fact that so much time also went into Fire Flash, and even things like the airport control tower and all the ancillary things that, you know, I say they only pop up in this episode, but of course they do recur later. But to all intents and purposes, when you're dealing with Trapped in the Sky in isolation, those are the guest aspects of it. They still have a lot of work put into them, and the design is still very, very nice. So yeah, I don't doubt that whatsoever.
I have a question for you, Jack.
Yes.
If you're interested in answering, how do you suppose, this is a speculation question, so we don't know the answer.
Yeah.
How do you suppose that nasty baddie the Hood managed to weasel his way into the landing gear of this aircraft? I mean, it's extraordinary. He has unlimited access there to plant a bomb that's pretty big. I mean, if you look at it next to him,
yeah, and bright red, of course,
and it says auto bomb in very friendly letters.
No, I agree. It's interesting because the obvious answer to that question is, well, when they wrote this, it was the 1960s, and airport security isn't what it is today. And the idea of someone coming in from outside, totally unauthorized, just turning up dressed as a technician, being able to make those kinds of modifications to an aircraft is unthinkable nowadays. And you would say, well, in the 60s, they didn't think like that. But the episode does also place quite a large emphasis on the fact that the airport does have its own police force, does have its own security team, and which the Hood is then also able to weasel his way into.
Navigate.
Yeah. And I think, and again, Stingray is a really good indicator for this, you know, because we always laugh about how in Stingray the security team is incredibly lax. I think that was just sort of carried over. It's just one of those conveniences of the plot, really, that was just necessary. But yeah, as you say, we'll never kind of know that there isn't a proper answer to this question, other than, well, it suited the story, and at least he was in disguise. At least he didn't turn up in his, what I must say is a lovely flowery tunic,
which he did bring with him, by the way.
He took it with him. Yeah, you see it hanging up in.
Yeah, I'm glad.
And then never again, never for the rest of the show.
No, done with that. Enough of that.
Yeah, but yes. So I will say he made some effort. I mean, of course, I suppose there's a version of it where he gets to the front gate of security and uses his hypnotic powers to influence his way in. But of course,
that's the thing. If every little detail was explained on screen, it would really bog down the plot, wouldn't it?
Yeah. It would take a while to get going if you were like, okay, we have to follow how the Hood gets to get. I mean, in the 3-hour cut of Trapped in the Sky, maybe that's in there. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if there is a version like that out there, but
Oh man.
no. I'm sure that's nothing but a myth. But yes, the Hood does manage to plant his bright red bomb, which I love. I mean, those are the kind of quirky elements of the show that you have to love. It's like, well, it's a bomb, so to make it look dangerous, we have to paint it bright red and clearly label the fact that it's a bomb. You know, that's just a clever way of conveying the threat without having to take a whole bunch of time in the script with the Hood building his bomb and, you know, trying.
Right.
Now, I will say in this throughout this script, there are a lot of clever moments of like shorthand where something that would normally take a really long time to explain and set up is kind of, you know, not waved off, but like just done quickly. Stuff like the flight attendant coming over to Tintin and explaining completely unprompted, kind of explaining the whole concept of Fire Flash.
It's
which I
the
think is fair enough.
exposition that we need to know communicated in a conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's fair enough, particularly when you're dealing with an initial episode. you do need to have conversations like that, and I think it's pretty forgivable, really.
And I love what they do with the shorthand that they use to abbreviate those kinds of plot moments. That extra space that buys them in running time, they use for little moments of silence and little moments of quiet that really add emphasis to the drama of whatever's happening on screen.
Yeah. Well, this is where Barry Gray's music is, you know, worthy of definitely worthy of a mention. It's definitely could be considered that M word that we're not allowed to say. But what makes it
would not be what it is without that music. That is absolutely true.
But to your point, it's actually the moments of restraint where you don't have the music constantly telling you this is how you should be feeling. It's reserved for moments that really need it. Yeah, exactly. And having that those times to breathe and to let the pace of the show just kind of ebb and flow. That makes it an experience that is it's an enjoyable viewing experience as a result of that. I think
that's what makes it. That's what I think gives it its feature film quality. Because in a feature film, you don't have any distractions. Ideally, you see a feature film in a theater where you're isolated with the screen.
Yeah.
And so there's more opportunities to kind of explore different ideas and to pause and to reflect and to take a moment to allow the dramatic emphasis to build up. And Trapped in the Sky has that energy just in spades. There's so many moments where it feels like it belongs in the cinema.
Definitely. And of course, then the story starts to unfold. The Hood makes his infamous phone call where he's like, okay, we're going to get the plot started now. And you know, the airport controller, the mustachioed airport controller, starts trying to make some decisions. I'm not going to tell you his name. No.
Oh, okay.
How dare you?
Well, I was just curious what his name might be. You know.
Well, you'll have to go and watch other episodes of the show because it's not actually it's worth saying it's not actually in this episode that his name is revealed, so it's not relevant.
True.
Not relevant, so I'm not going to tell you.
The unnamed airport controller.
Yeah, who is ironically such a beloved character in fandom just because of how wrong his life and career goes. And how many times International Rescue bail him out over the course of the series.
A hapless, unlucky chap.
Yeah.
this unnamed airport controller.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not
Yeah,
played for comedy. It's just something that happens to come along afterwards.
It just happens to be funny.
Mm.
So yes, this phone call is made. The pilot is interrupted from his efforts to go hit on presumably Tintin
Presumably.
by a call from airport traffic control. Some crash tenders appear. They start heading back to London.
Yeah. And all the while, obviously I'm not running through the exact sequence of events, but all the while, up in space, Thunderbird 5 is listening in. John Tracy, the first kind of moment of like, there's someone in an international rescue uniform, and this all feels very proper. It kind of starts with Thunderbird 5 up there. I think that introduction, that's another moment where they don't have to explain what the function of Thunderbird 5 is. They don't have to get into the technicality of it. It's all done through basically no dialogue at all, where John is just listening to all these communications going on, and it happens to isolate the one from London Airport. I think that's again another brilliant moment.
I love there's a device that's sort of implied but not often seen, which is I would call it automatic danger detector. I don't know what the actual name of it is.
Yeah.
But there's an alarm that goes off when a potentially dangerous situation is detected. A broadcast is heard, and John's looking out the window, staring at planet Earth.
Yeah.
Below him, but the machine detects that there's a potential problem and calls him over to give a listen. And I think that's an interesting aspect of the Thunderbirds universe that basically never really shows up again. It's definitely phased out over time.
Well, John's always just kind of standing there. It's kind of the whole thing gets accelerated once you get into the show proper. You kind of, the viewer knows this stuff already by that point, or even if they don't know it, it sort of doesn't matter. Another example of this, and we're kind of skipping ahead a little bit, but another example of that would be the whole business of Thunderbird 1 taking off prior to Thunderbird 2 taking off. And that whole process of Scott being in the air flying towards London and talking back and forth with John, trying to assess the situation, and then radioing back to base and saying, we're going to need Thunderbird 2, we're going to need this and that. I find that's a really interesting way of doing it. And it kind of clearly establishes what Scott's role is supposed to be in that sort of reconnaissance role, where he makes the decisions and decides what they will or won't need while he's on the way to the danger zone. But that element kind of gets dropped. I think they do it for a couple of episodes, and then that kind of gets dropped, and it's just like, no, we just need to power on ahead and get the story going. So let's just have Thunderbirds 1 and 2 take off at the same time.
Yeah, it becomes a bit redundant, much like the huge screen in Marineville that demonstrates where Stingray is in the launch tunnel.
Yeah.
It's a very, it makes sense for it to exist, perhaps.
Yeah.
But over time, just for storytelling purposes, you can speed up and speed past those elements that are.
So it makes sense that it's there in like the first episode, but
which episode?
The initial one. The initial one.
Right. The initial
but
one. I wasn't sure what you meant.
Yeah. But one other thing I wanted to call up slightly before the Thunderbirds machines actually take off is all the business that's done to establish Jeff's character. And
yes, Jeff's second introduction, as it were.
He gets so many introductions in there. He basically gets 3 introductory scenes across the whole episode. Which I think is it's evidence for, again, this was always an hour long. They were taking the time to do that. It's structurally odd. But what I wanted to call out in particular was the fact that anytime Tintin sends a communication, where anytime she writes a letter or sends a telegram or whatever, it always goes to Jeff, and then Jeff will tell Carano about it, even though Carano is Tintin's father, and you would have thought would be the first person to know this stuff.
Well, and Carano presumably took this message as it was coming in off the wire.
Yeah.
And put it in an envelope and handed it to Jeff in order for Jeff to read it to him.
Unfortunately, I wonder whether that's a sort of weakness of how the character of Carano was written as this subservient figure who, needs Jeff to explain everything to him.
Somewhat lacking in agency, as it were.
Yeah, which you probably wouldn't. The optics of that are not necessarily that good when you look at it now. But yeah, and I suppose, it serves the purpose in this as far as the story and getting it across to the audience is concerned.
Right.
And they want to establish Jeff as the authority figure, and I suppose therefore they have to have him convey all the information. But it's one of those things, if you think about it too long, it doesn't make any sense, but it's fine as is.
Yes. It doesn't, when you drill down into the details in a security hazard review or in a podcast like this, it can really you can get bogged down in the minutia and lose track of the fact that the pacing of the show works.
Yeah, that's it. What they're doing
show,
structurally to actually keep the story moving is great. There's no issue with that whatsoever.
It works great. But then when you stop to think about it, as you say, it becomes like, wait a minute. Wouldn't it have worked just as well for Carano to run in and read the message to Jeff?
Yeah.
It probably would have. And it would have made Carano a stronger character, and then maybe he would have stuck around for longer, but we don't know that because it's not the way it was written. So
that's not the way it was written. No, it isn't. It isn't. Anyway, after quite a bit of back and forth between London Airport trying to do things to establish what's actually going on with Fire Flash, which you could describe as extraneous material that doesn't need to be there, but I think just adds to build up the T word, the excitement of it. Yeah, but anyway, you eventually get to this point where, okay, it's international rescues, big break, they're getting started, it's mission time, it's go time.
And what do the Thunderbirds do when it's time to go?
Well, of course, they go down their launch slides and spinning walls, and they do all that wonderful stuff that the series is well known for. And because it's trapped in the sky, we get to see it played out pretty much in full.
Pretty much in full. Almost everything that you see in Thunderbirds is here to be seen in Trapped in the Sky. There's a few exceptions, of course, a few shots that pop up later. But it is, if you like launches, this is the episode for you. There's the launch of the Fire Flash, the launch of Thunderbird 1, the launch of Thunderbird 2, and the launch of the target carrying aircraft later on.
Yes.
So it is a launch heavy story.
Yeah. Speaking of the target carrying aircraft, I had to laugh when I looked at it this time. It never really sort of dawned on me before. But when they have that conversation about, are there any target carrying aircraft in the area at the moment? And there's a man sitting in the airport control tower, and he just has his little toy versions of the TX-204 sitting on the table that are totally not in scale with the map. If you look at the size of that TX-204 on the table, it's like taking up the whole of the southeast of England. It's like, how can you possibly tell where those things are? I'm surprised, given that it's Thunderbirds, that there wasn't some screen with a map, with a tracking, with a little light going blip, 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 something like that. I'm surprised
Something
there wasn't
like
that.
It would have used without question in Captain Scarlet. It would have been something like that. Something like this.
Exactly that.
these tiny figures would never have appeared in a later show.
But it's
But I'm
sweet.
so glad that they're
Very cute.
here. And the comedy of it for me is the voice of this particular airport character. He has
Right.
this very proper, very grown up sounding voice as he's sitting over
Yes.
there playing. It's
Yes.
just really, very professional as he plays with his toy airplanes.
And that's all there is in front of him. He's just sat at that table. He has one job. It's just to move the little TX204 models around the table. That's all he does.
I like to think that real life air traffic control is like this. That it's basically a D&D session in the tower.
Yes,
they're
I love
just
that.
they're just rolling for initiative
Yeah,
to see when the airplanes are going to go next.
yeah. And talking of playtime, I have a theory about Bob Meddings. That
Talk about Bob Meddings.
Bob Meddings, I think, did not just come up with the idea of, hanging himself out of the back of a TX204 and cruising along in the sky. I think that's something he's always wanted to do. And the Fire Flash disaster was just a really good excuse. What do you reckon?
That seems like a sound theory. I want to know how Bob even found out that there was a disaster going on. Had this information leaked
to be
all
fair,
the staff of the airport?
Everyone at that airport saw the Fire Flash fly right up to the control tower to have an X-ray shot taken of its wing. Everyone saw what that was going on and must have thought, that doesn't look good.
One of the frequently commented on weaknesses of this episode is there's a kind of lack of focus on the perspective of the passengers aboard Fire Flash.
Yeah.
And we get this brief moment from Tintin where she says something must be wrong. We're losing height. We're going back to London. And they send a message that, over the intercom that they're going back to London. But you don't really get a sense that they're being kept in the know.
Right.
Of everything that's happening, which is pretty typical in real life as well. When you're on an airplane, they don't tell you everything that's going on. So they can just carry on with their job. But there's a real sense in which they're sort of forgotten about. They're sort of just there to provide that dramatic effect of the danger.
Yeah.
But beyond there isn't much.
They do basically, by the time you get to the landing sequence at the end of the episode, you don't see them at all. And you do wonder whether, would it have been so hard to just have a few cutaways to, people like Tintin and the weird guy that she sat next to, just maybe once the plane has stopped on the runway and everything's safe, you could have had a shot of tables turned over and people on the floor, but just to show that they're okay.
To show that they're okay and to justify some of the establishment of Tintin, who gets her very own Thunderbird 5, what we now call the Thunderbird 5, but it's Tintin's drum roll that, that drum
That's
beat
true.
that is associated with Thunderbird 5 first appears with the introduction of Tintin. So clearly she's meant to be important, but they don't treat her as such in the final act.
Yeah.
Or indeed much of the second half of the episode, which we're coming up on now.
Right. So I just have 3 words for the whole segment with Bob Meddings and trying to get on board the Fire Flash and all of that stuff. And those 3 words, and I said them so many times in my original review on the blog, but I'll say them again here. Shut the hatch.
Oh my goodness.
Shut the hatch.
Oh, why? It would have made all the difference. All the difference in the world.
I watch, every time I watch it, I think, is there a reason why they shouldn't have shut that hatch? Am I missing something? I don't
Can't
think
of
I am.
anything.
No.
I can't think of
No.
anything because he clearly has his own oxygen.
Yeah.
It's not as if he would be suffocated in there.
Yeah.
Shutting the
And
hatches seems to be
presumably,
illogical.
I would assume, and then again, you think about it too hard, it starts to become a problem. I'm like, well, would there be a way, if the reason the hatch was kept open is that he wouldn't be able to get out again? I was like, well, what was the plan if all had gone well? Would Bob have just stayed in the landing gear, clinging onto the wheel when when they actually did make a successful landing? Or was he gonna at some point crawl out and into the flight deck or something? In which
What
case, why
was
did
the
they
plan
need to put Bob? Why did they need to put Bob Meddings on board in the first place? Why couldn't have Captain Hansen or his co-pilot gone and
Right.
sorted out the problem? Why did they need to do all of that stuff with the TX-204? So it must be that the hatch was only accessible from outside. That doesn't seem like a very sensible way to build an aircraft. But also,
Well,
yeah. What was the next plan? Because the other thing is Bob insists that they cut the cable and they bring the thing that he rides in on. It gets winched back into the aircraft. So what was the plan? I feel like falling out of the aircraft. Maybe that was the plan. Maybe he was always going to parachute out.
Right. Yeah, because he was wearing a parachute. Logically.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe that was the plan. In which case,
he was going to chuck the bomb overboard. Because I'm just guessing that Bob wasn't also an explosives expert trained to defuse bombs.
I don't know what his job originally at London Airport was supposed to be.
No, it's
yes,
not
I would
really.
Assume he's not there to defuse bombs. No,
that uniform, he's actually a janitor. He goes to restrooms, but he just happened to hear, or he noticed the fire flash fly by the airport control tower, and he's like, "Ooh, there's something. I bet this is a perfect opportunity for me to hang out in the back of an airplane."
He goes home that day from work. He turns to his partner. He says, "Like, I finally got to do it." She'd say, "Oh no, not that scheme of yours where you hang out the back of an airplane." "Yeah, I finally got to do it." And she's like, "Well, did it work?" He goes, "Well, kind of."
The part of that sequence that always gives me a heart attack is it's not even meant to, it's not played up at all. It's a very small moment, but as he's winching out the back of the aircraft, he before he clears the tail, he starts to dip and weave a bit.
Yeah,
and he doesn't have any sort of safety bar over his head. He's just wearing a helmet, and he very nearly could have cracked his head on the back of that.
Oh yeah,
of that bar. It's an incredibly risky plan, and it definitely establishes the need for a group of specialists in rescue to come into the story. So
that's why it's important. Yes, you're right.
That is the important element of it. It's establishing the kind of general incompetence of other attempts at rescue.
That's true. That's exactly it. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right there.
I do.
And again, I think that was going to be a feature. Again, I get this from watching the Century 21 films. Features on the original episodes, that the idea was to sort of spend half the episode setting up the characters, having them attempt to solve the problems themselves, and then the second half was when international rescue come on the scene. And obviously that plays out in this episode. It plays out in Pit of Peril as well. But again, they start to figure out which aspects of the series work and what works well for pacing and structure and things like that. And so that sort of stuff is still done to an extent, but not nearly the same way. So there you are. But anyway, that fails, which does make you go, ugh, which is how you're supposed to feel. I think you're supposed to feel disappointed that none of that paid off. But it does mean that the way is now clear for international rescue to appear. And
Yes. And that leads me to my absolute favorite moment in this episode, Jack.
yes, please
It
do.
is
please
if I was to do a top 10 moments from Trapped in the Sky video, which I may well do after having watched Trapped
you
in the Sky
absolutely should.
several times. uh this lovely moment where this guy who works in the airport control tower and doesn't have a mustache is watching his radar screen, and he detects an incoming aircraft, and he is so overcome by the data of how fast that aircraft is traveling that he collapses into a waiting chair.
Yeah.
He just like cannot bear it and falls into a chair. And I just think that sums up the attitude of Thunderbirds
Yeah.
so well.
That's such a love. I agree. It's a really nice little, just a touch, just
It
a
is.
little
It's so
something.
small.
Probably wasn't in the script. You know,
Probably not.
maybe Alan Patillo, the director, would have suggested it, or one of the puppeteers would have like, I'm just going to try. Let's try setting up the shot this way. I don't know, but it is those little touches that just elevate.
It
And
just
again,
elevates the thing.
it serves as good shorthand for, hey, this is unusual. This is an impressive thing. Audience at home, you should also be impressed by this thing.
Exactly.
So yeah, it makes sense.
It's such a lovely
Thunderbird
moment.
1.
I smile every time.
Thunderbird 1 turns up on the scene, just sort of barges his way in, and that's one of the definitely one of the defining moments for Scott
It
is
is
that confrontation he has with the mustachioed airport controller.
Scott definitely comes in throwing his weight around a bit.
Yeah.
And kind of being like, well, do you want to save lives, or do you want to sit here and talk about paperwork?
Yeah.
And it's sort of inconsiderate in a way of Scott.
Yeah.
But also this unnamed airport person.
Yeah. I'm glad that there is someone in International Rescue who can play that role of being the tough guy.
There has to be the bad cop in a manner of speaking.
Yeah.
Speaking of bad cops, this is all part of the Hood's plan.
I have to applaud you for that segue.
Thank you.
That was outstanding. That was amazing.
That's the sort of segue that we aspire to on the.
Oh, can you
security
do it
episode.
again? I just want to hear it one more time.
I don't think I
So
can.
good.
I don't think I can.
Okay. But anyway, the Hood.
Yes, the Hood has changed his costume. He is now airport police. And he also has a mustache now.
Yes.
Which is a very good look for him. Something kind of unusual happens here. He's taking pictures of Thunderbird 1, of course, which is his plan all along, was just to bring them here, to cause disaster, to wreak havoc in order to bring international rescue out into the open. And he uses his powers, Jack. He turns on his glowing eyes to snap the shutter on his camera.
Is that what happens?
his
It's always up
in
for
his
some
hat.
interpretation there. I always kind of, and it happens a few times in the series where his eyes light up just because he's happy. You know,
That's true.
and that's how I've always interpreted that moment, is just, oh, everything's going well for the Hood, so he just lights his eyes up just because he's quite jolly. And then I don't know why, I've always assumed that I always get these mixed up between diegetic and non-diegetic. But it's non-diegetic sound when it's like added afterwards, basically. I've always taken that camera sound effect to be something that is purely added for the benefit of the audience to know that it's a camera,
Right.
and not actually something that's happening. But I suppose now the way you describe it actually makes more sense, where he's using his telepathic powers to make the camera go. I suppose that makes sense. Rather than my slightly artsy way of looking at it.
Well, it's either that, or it begins photographing. It works on the same principle as the Spectrum caps,
Right.
where it just telepathically
Yeah, just
swings down
somehow just works.
whenever
Yeah.
needed.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, dearie me.
That's an interesting moment.
Yeah. Now,
So
I'm trying
what's
to remember
next?
exactly what happens after the break. Is it then Thunderbird 2 turns up?
We are into the recap that Scott provides. He's set up his enormous mobile control unit in the airport control tower.
Yeah.
And this is something that you've commented on in your review. There's something off about Scott in this whole sequence. Every scene, just about, where he's in the airport control tower,
Yes.
his facial expression
He's
seems a
smiling.
bit off.
He's
His
absolutely loving life up there, having a grand old time, predicting doom and gloom, and concentrating hard on trying to make this rescue a success.
Yeah.
But just grinning from ear to ear all the way through.
There's other little things too, like this early uniform they haven't quite figured out how to pose the puppet in a flattering way in
Right.
certain shots. There's some teething troubles there. Also, his mouth doesn't fully open
Yeah.
at different times, which I think is either the puppet being new, the leather that would have been used to make that lip would be too stiff.
Wow.
It actually genuinely does take time.
Yeah. I'd never considered that
or
before, but you're
else-
probably right. Wow.
I had never considered it
Yeah.
until I'd seen these puppets
I
in
mean, that
person
is
and got to mess
something
with them.
that is something that must have been so. It must have felt so alien to the teams working on it, where they obviously spent months and months and months working with the Stingray puppets and the Stingray sets and the way that show was made, and just using these tools, because that's what the puppets are. They are tools for telling the story. You know, operating them and learning all their quirks, learning all their ways of going about things. Then, pretty much immediately switching to a whole new range of puppets, whole new sets, everything's new. I can't even imagine what that it must feel so alien to suddenly be operating a puppet that is different to what you've been so used to.
Yeah, they all have
all
their
those
own
months.
little quirks. The most famous one being the Hood, because he's bald, which is extremely tricky. If a wire breaks or anything, then he has to be resurfaced. Or B, because he has enormous hands. To give him a sense of power, they give him really large hands.
Yeah.
And that, I'm sure that would have felt different for a puppeteer trying to operate that. Another possibility with Scott here is that he may have had not enough voltage going to his mouth. There may have been a loose lead that may have led to the same effect.
Anyway. You have thought about this on a level that I never would have even considered, but but those are the realities. That's what that's what it takes to make Thunderbirds.
It is.
Talk about all the big, wonderful spectacle of it, but actually, it's in those minute little things that
most of
day
the
to
time
day would have made a difference.
You don't have those problems because all of those little things have been dealt with, and it's actually quite rare that you have a sequence like this where it isn't quite working.
Yeah.
But yes,
it pays off beautifully. Yeah.
The Hood's plan would have worked perfectly if only he hadn't gone inside Thunderbird 1 to take pictures.
Yeah.
Because that's where the automatic photo detector is.
Yeah. There's a device that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, does it? Sometimes it does function when you're outside of the craft. Like in later, I think, like Terror in New York. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But in this particular case, it's the Hood is inside the craft. He is snapping away. Obviously, he's standing on the set in a vertical setup when it should be horizontal, but we'll gloss over that. Yeah. How does he get in? How does the ladder come up and down for someone who I assume Scott has like a remote like a car,
Right.
like a car door, a car clicker thing that makes the
Or
ladder
his,
come down for him to climb in or whatever it is.
or
But
he could just take his jet bike
yeah,
device.
yeah.
Uh,
But anyway, the hood gets in, it sets off the automatic camera detector, and
he does a
Hugh-
runner.
the airport police somehow failing to catch up with him, and the airport controller claiming, "Oh, we did our best." No, you
Yeah.
didn't. No, you
Very-
absolutely did not do your best. You gave up when you got to the airport perimeter.
Very convincing apology there
Yeah,
from
yeah,
the nameless individual.
yes.
But
But
Lady Penelope is called. Thunderbird 2 has arrived, and we can move on to the most important part of this whole episode. Unless there's anything in there you wanted to cover.
well, you skip over Lady
Skipping
Penelope's
ahead
introduction
slightly.
quite quickly, but I would
I
just
am
say
skipping ahead.
that there's a school of thought again when we were speculating, oh, was this episode originally 25 minutes? Was Lady Penelope added later because it feels kind of rushed, kind of tacked on? I don't think that's the case. I think it's more that they all they needed to do was establish who that character was, what their role was. And so I think it's deliberately kept to quite a small segment of the episode.
Yeah.
And,
It is kind of a teaser unto itself, isn't it?
Right. Exactly. And I think in the series of events, Lady Penelope, like the comic strip, had already happened. So, it was kind of people were probably expecting to see the character in the episode. So it just made sense to kind of put her in there just to get her started. And then obviously later episodes come in to flesh her out more as a character and do a fantastic job of that. So, yeah, I mean, it does feel a little bit odd. It is kind of squeezed in, but I don't know how one would do it differently.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted to say on that, really.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
So we get to the elevator cars. Ben, I challenge you to come up with one other use for the elevator cars other than catching fire flashes out of the sky.
Ooh.
And it's okay if you can't think of one.
I think you could use them for catching up with a runaway tanker truck.
Okay.
That you want to, because they're quite tall, I would imagine, from the scale of it. So if you had someone standing on the elevator platform, they could presumably jump from the elevator platform onto a moving vehicle.
Yeah.
But that's, I'm stretching it a bit.
Yeah, that is stretching it.
They're really only good for catching fire flashes out of the sky.
Yes. Which there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. It's just
That is
again, it's one of those things. If you think about it too hard, it doesn't work. But
a key Thunderbirds element, there's always a specialized piece of equipment already loaded in the pod, waiting for Virgil to select just exactly what's needed for the emergency.
Yeah, that's the magic. That's the magic of it. And that's the indefinable. I think when people try and define what it is about Thunderbirds that makes it just a cut above, that makes it so special, it is that slightly magical element where it's just like, open the pod door and we reveal exactly the right thing to do exactly the thing we want. It is something that defies storytelling, yet somehow it works.
Yeah. And like all the good Thunderbirds devices, it is labeled what it is in large letters.
Yep.
Which is an element that I really appreciated.
That's very helpful.
Started putting labels on all my stuff to let everyone know exactly what is what.
Oh, yeah. So keeping in mind all the words that we have banned, describe the fire flash landing sequence to me.
Well, it's a double approach. The first attempt to rescue the fire flash is a bit of a failure. the whole nature of this drama that we haven't explained yet, but presumably everyone watching this knows, the actual danger to the passengers of Fireflash is not, in fact, that they will run out of fuel and crash before they can land successfully.
Right.
The actual danger is they will be exposed to atomic radiation within a certain amount of time. And the radiation safety factor, after the first attempt fails, the first attempt to land the Fireflash with these elevator cars fails because one of the radio-controlled elevator cars fails. The radiation safety factor expires, which means that all the people aboard the Fireflash have been exposed at the end of the story
Yeah.
to radiation. Not a lethal dose, but still radiation exposure. That can be a very serious thing that requires hospitalization, I would think.
Yes.
But at
And
the
that
end,
kind of
Tintin is just standing there with Alan.
Yeah, it brings us back to whether I mean probably the reason why we haven't talked about that aspect of the story is because it's quite nebulous and it's hard to define because radiation is
Yes.
not a visual thing, but it was, and that was kind of the threat, it was this invisible danger that no one really quite understood, certainly at that time in the 60s anyway. And it's one of the reasons why it would have been good to have more shots of the passengers during the landing sequence. We could have maybe in a highly exaggerated way that you wouldn't understand. Maybe, people would have started sweating and started falling unconscious and stuff, just so we could start to see the effect of the radiation exposure. Because, it's kind of thrown out there as a threat, something we should be worried about, but we don't see it. We don't see we could have easily had the radiation shielding of the reactor could have started to disintegrate or something like that. We don't see it.
It's
And I think that
not
is
showing,
missing.
isn't it?
Yeah. But there were so many other things to fit into that sequence because
Captain Hansen tells us what's happening, but they don't show us.
Yeah.
And you're quite right. There's so much going on here in this sequence. The drama of losing one of the elevator cars.
Yeah.
The reveal that there's a fourth elevator car standing by, which was a huge stress point. As a kid watching this, you're like, what are they going to do? They lost one of their cars. How are they going to catch the fire? Oh, they have another one. Okay.
They have another one.
They have a backup elevator car, which it's sort of a clown car energy where there's just an infinite number of
yes.
I think in the cutaway drawings, they're kind of stacked in there.
They have a clever, Graham Bleethman has a very clever way of stacking up the elevator cars so that they all fit in the pod. But
Graham figured that out, so we don't have to.
Exactly.
I will say I've pointed out some of my quibbles with this scene. I absolutely love it.
Oh, it's extraordinary, and as I say, we've been pointing out all the elements that aren't there, and it would have maybe benefited from, but you have so many points of drama going on throughout that. You're worried about Captain Hansen and his co-pilot, what they're up to, so you keep going back to them. You're worried about Scott commanding his first mission, so you keep going back to him to make sure he's coordinating everything. You're obviously worried about Virgil sitting under there in the elevator car trying to steer everything and trying to do everything at once. You've got our hapless airport controller trying to chip in and have a few words there and try to establish his authority. And then obviously you've got the actual spectacle itself, which is this giant aircraft trying to slow down using someone else's wheels, basically. And I think in terms of that visual spectacle of it, the thing for me that the reason why it works and the reason why it's so memorable is because you could just about picture that happening in real life. You could just about, and indeed there's viral videos and fake recreations of it where you do see aircraft trying to touch their wheels down in the back of a truck and all this sort of nonsense. And it's something that kids could easily recreate with their toys and stuff like that. So you could there was a certain aspect of it that was that was just about tangible, I suppose.
Yeah, there's a grounding in reality of it, which is
Yeah,
grounding, pun very much intended.
Yeah. But yeah, and then the fact that the brakes fail, the fact that it doesn't go to plan is incredibly exciting. Because you're like, wow, I thought I knew how this was going to play out, and then it doesn't.
It's full of surprises. It's much like the first mission of I said the word.
Wow.
Of
We've been doing quite well.
We've been doing well up until that point.
Yeah.
The debut mission of international rescue is also kind of shaky because the bomb very nearly detonates. It falls at that last moment there. It just kind of snags.
Yeah.
And it's sort of implied that if it had fallen, it would have exploded.
Oh, it's great.
So it's a very near thing, and
that's so well done. It's so well done. Like, of all the things,
really nice.
You would think, okay, we've jumped through all these loopholes. We've managed to get the craft to a complete stop. It really is like a heart coming out of your mouth type moment where it could all come down to what if it just knocks it? It's just, and some might say that's over the top. It's like, oh, come on, that's an embellishment too far. I don't think so. I think it perfectly puts the full stop on that moment, which I think you do need.
At that point, Virgil crashed, and we don't know what happened to him. So it sort of has this feeling of anything can happen.
Yeah.
To coin a phrase.
Yeah. But you do have, what I like about that is then when you do check in on Virgil to make sure he's okay, it is there's a feeling of warmth, and it's quite touching how, Scott, who is grinning from ear to ear throughout anyway, but particularly during that moment, you do feel his smile is genuine.
Yeah.
And he
some
checks
really
on
great
his brother
voice
and
acting from Shane Rimmer there, really selling the all of the voice acting is great in this.
Oh yeah, but the relief is tangible, and they're telling the audience how to feel, and the feeling is everything's okay.
He's really that's another thing about Thunderbirds is it doesn't play like a children's show. Everyone plays it straight as if it's a real drama, as if it's a real aircraft crash. The music from Barry Gray here has all the tension and gripping energy that you would expect in a major motion picture.
Yeah. And the other thing that makes it feel quite grown up is then after that moment of relief, you go back to the mustachioed airport controller, saying, hang on a minute, what about this? And there's all these loose ends we still need to tie up, and, okay, you're going to fly off now, and da-da-da-da-da. And that, I don't know, there's something about that feels like, okay, this is still important business. There's still work to be done here. We're not just all kind of going to blow this off and, hey, isn't it great? We've saved the day. It's like, no. Life goes on. We still need to figure out the hood. And indeed, that is what happens next is Lady Penelope gets her moment, which I think is generally considered quite a good moment for Penelope and Parker in the series. It certainly replays quite a lot.
I do think
taking out the hood at the end.
It's a nice encapsulation of what they do. It's often criticized for the violence being a bit excessive. Obviously, the hood is none the worse for the wearer, so all's well that ends well in that respect.
It's spectacle. It's shorthand. It's a way, you could have done it in a more non-destructive way, but at the end of the day, we've just had this huge adventure spectacle. I almost said the word. We've had that huge spectacle. It would be a bit of a disappointment if the episode just ended with the hood pulling over to the side of the road and Lady Penelope getting out and wagging her finger at him. It needed that extra flourish by his car getting blown up. So I think that's fair enough. And
it is the shark blowing up at the end of Jaws.
Exactly.
It doesn't quite make sense, but dramatically it makes sense.
Yeah. And then it keeps going. This is the thing. It's like we reach that climax, and then the story keeps unfolding, because then we go back to Tracy Island,
Much like we
And-
have multiple introductions for Jeff, we have
Yeah.
multiple endings.
There are multiple moments where this episode could stop, but it chooses not to. And for the better, I think, because again, one of the things that makes Thunderbirds for me is those moments in the Tracy Lounge where it feels quite homely and warm, and you get a feeling of this this group of characters as a family and just hanging out together. I really like that. I love that it takes the time to do that. I think that's one of its strengths. So yeah, we get the demonstration of Operation Cover Up and the Doctor. I mean, yeah, get a nice. Well, I was going to say an ending to the Carano thread. Doesn't really end anything. The Doctor just says, "Oh, he's fine."
Yes, it feels a bit racist or perhaps ageist. that he just-
Potentially, yeah,
he just
potentially.
kind of brushes off Carano's concerns with, "Oh, there's nothing to worry about. He's fine. You know how he is. He's
Yeah,
just always
yeah.
having
No,
it."
it doesn't necessarily look good on Carano, but I suppose in a way that also does add an element of this mystery hasn't been solved, so come
It
next week
ends on
and maybe we will.
nice question mark. A nice question mark ending. What
Yeah.
will happen with Carano next? I like
Yeah.
that.
Unfortunately, it's not really picked up in the same. They don't sort of carry on from where they left off with that. But
No.
Instead, what we do end on is the triumph of people are getting to know International Rescue, and they want like the viewers at home, the world wants more International Rescue.
They do. And it is spectacular the way the whole thing is shrouded in mystery. Cloaked in mystery. That was such an important part to me as an adult now watching it. I'm like, why did it have to be a secret? Was it really that important? Couldn't they have had security measures without being a secret?
Yeah.
And indeed, later on in the show, it becomes, by the time you get to Thunderbird 6, it's basically not a secret anymore.
Yeah. But the fact
was
that they're
so
able to
important
use
as a
those
kid.
ingredients later on to tell stories, things like the imposters, things like Desperate Intruder, where they're like, okay, they were set up as ingredients for good storytelling, and I think that was wise. I think that was a clever thing to do. So,
and there's a reason that secret worlds and secret identities and secret organizations do so well in storytelling for kids. I think kids need that sense of agency, that sense of belonging, and that sense of being someone significant and in secret. That sort of like plays a big role. I think that's really important from a psychological kind of overly analytical point of view.
Yeah. But no, it's great. Yeah, as an audience member to feel like you're in the club, you're in the know, you know what's happening. So yeah, I think that is really important. Ben, I think we have run through all of our thoughts on the episode, but I think we do have time. We do have time to look at some of our viewers' reactions. So I'm going to start if I can, on Facebook, where we had some lovely comments from people that I'm going to read out. So Clive Stewart Erdley says, a fabulous opener. Oh, by the way, the banned words, you can't. I'm not taking on the viewers' points for this if they use any of the banned words.
Oh, well, I think we can officially take that screen off now.
All right. Well, basically, I lost that contest quite badly, but it was much harder than I thought it would be, actually.
It was extremely hard, and I would like to thank you for making that needlessly complicated for me.
I know. I appreciate it. Well, there we go. Anyway, the final score was 8-5. So I owe Ben a Lego set. So there we go. But anyway, Clive says that Trapped in the Sky is a fabulous opener to an amazing series that created a phenomenon all of its own that's 60 years old this year, has a massive impact on the culture of today's television. Andrew Clements says, I wouldn't say it's endless padding, but like many other pilot episodes, there are a few things that don't quite gel. I loved when we got to see the insert shots of Tintin and as the Fire Flash lands during Stand By for Action concert, which I believe you were the one who made that edit.
I did. I very sneakily stuck in a shot of Tintin and added
Yeah.
some fake camera shake to make it look like she was bouncing along with the elevator cars.
Yeah.
So thank you
there
for
you go.
noticing that, Casey,
You get that little what if. That
what if moment.
Philip Cully says the episode itself is fantastic and quite rightly seen as one of the best. The rescue itself is thrilling and everything works perfectly, even taking advantage of the behind the scenes issues. I assume he's referring to that story about the elevator car crashing, which again,
we didn't even get into that behind.
I'm
the scenes
slightly
stuff.
suspect of that story. Oh, the story goes that Derek Meddings and Gerry Anderson both tell that story of how the elevator car crashing was not part of the script, and they just decided, oh, that model shot went wrong, but let's use it as part of the story. I don't know, maybe that did happen, but it was always part of the hour-long original version of the episode. I don't know.
Right. The question I always ask about that story is which elevator car crash was it?
Right.
That was the unplanned
So
one.
I think if you were going to highlight any shot, it's the long shot of it's a wide shot where I guess
Of all
Fireflash
three
is
cars.
overshooting anyway. Now that I think about it, but that you see the little elevator car just sort of trundle off the road.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's the point. Is there are things in that story that don't quite tally with what's on screen. So who knows? Who knows? I'm sure Century 21 Films can figure that one out for us.
Please make a video about that, Century 21 Films, if you know.
Please do. But Philip also says the Medding subplot feels pure unnecessary padding. We know it's not going to work since International Rescue have to save the day, and in later episodes they find much better ways to fill the full hour.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly would agree that of the episodes that almost certainly were 25 minutes to start with, they do come up with more creative ways of adding a subplot that maybe involves International Rescue more, so we have more time to get to know those characters, and so there are things like that. And then here was an interest. Speaking of Century 21 Films, there was an interesting conversation that went on Facebook where Tom Bright says a terrific episode. Personally, don't have a problem with the Medding sequence. It makes perfect sense in the context of the first episode that the authorities don't know International Rescue exists before Thunderbird 1 turns up. So why wouldn't they attempt to save Fireflash themselves? And he talks quite a lot about the adding and the extension and things like that. And then the Filmed in Super Mario Nation Facebook page actually came back and commented to highlight the fact that Tintin's material was not added later. That almost certainly was not. Well, I think fairly definitely was not an addition that was made.
That's great to know.
And Century 21 goes on to speculate. We did wonder if the script had grown during production, or then again, what was dropped during editing. The version that they found last year, the early work print with the alternative wall portraits, is almost certainly the earliest print of it ever made. And the same with a few of the other episode prints that they uncovered as well. So there we go. What do you think, by the way, while we're on the topic, what do you think of the wall portraits where only the face is cut out of the portrait? It is quite weird, isn't it?
It is weird. In the video, they describe it as, I forget the exact word that they use, but they almost talk about it as if it's horrifying in its kind of uncanniness.
Yeah.
I don't know about if I would go as far as that in terms of my opinion of how it looks. I think they could have possibly pulled it off. It definitely looks better to do it the way that they ultimately did it.
Yeah.
So I'm glad.
I think it's unnecessarily restrictive. I think it was just making the job way too hard for themselves, basically, is what it comes down to.
Yeah. It is a bit over-engineered solution to that
exactly.
problem.
Yeah.
For sure.
So I think it works. Yeah.
But it's
moving over to
it's great to get that peek back in time to see what that
absolutely
what they were
more of that
at originally.
It's amazing. Really, really, really incredible. Couple of comments from Blue Sky. Countdown to Zero says, Countdown to Zero says, watch this when it was on BBC Two in the early 90s and couldn't believe how nail-bitingly thrilling the landing sequence was. I ended that scene with almost as much sweat on my forehead as Virgil. A masterpiece of direction, editing, and music, which I think we all agree on that one.
Thank you, Countdown to Zero. I believe Countdown to Zero is in the chat, in the comments tonight. So if you're still with us,
Countdown to Zero
through the whole show, thank you for that.
Thank you
for your comments.
Yes, absolutely. Simpsons Clips 24 says, it wasn't my introduction to Thunderbirds per se. That honor goes to Path of Destruction, though I can vividly remember seeing Attack of the Alligators on BBC Two. But this is a good episode to introduce any potential and a fan to Thunderbirds. Fire Flash, Lady P, The Hood, what's not to like? I think that's it. It's like they're actually... it started off talking about some of the elements that aren't in this pilot episode. Things like Thunderbird 3 and Thunderbird 4 don't get their first installments until later on. Yeah. But the fact that they do manage to squeeze so much into this first episode is very impressive. Very clever bits of storytelling.
Thank you, Simpsons Clips. We've seen you in the chat as well. Thank you for coming along.
Lovely to have you here. Couple more comments now from YouTube. We've had so many people. Everyone wants to have their opinion on Trapped in the Sky, and I don't blame them at all. But Matthew Alderman Harris says, while some TV series take a few episodes to get going, Thunderbirds really hits the ground running with Trapped in the Sky. It effectively sets up the concept of international rescue and most of the core characters, while also having an exciting plot and the most iconic climactic sequence of any Anderson episode. Lou Grade was definitely right when he said, Gerry, this is a feature film, and ordered that Thunderbirds episodes be extended to 50 minutes. Class 87 fan 54 says, essential viewing without a doubt. While there is some padding, the episode perfectly establishes Thunderbirds and the premise of the series. The rescue of Fireflash is nail-biting action. Meanwhile, Penguin Made of Dynamite says, it has one of the most engaging rescue sequences in the series, especially as it doesn't go smoothly with the first attempt. The tension is just so perfectly executed throughout the entire sequence, though I do find the filler with Lieutenant Meddings is undermined by how that part ends. I really think they did well to make the Hood a credible villain in this episode, though saying the Hood's power over Carano is always uncomfortable to watch. I don't mind him having hypnotic powers, but the stuff with Carano just goes a little too far and never worked for me personally. That said, I think the episode is a solid pilot and starts as it means to go on. An absolute classic. All those words that we were trying to avoid, our viewers just
I'm starting
used
to
up
think
all of them.
You compiled this list of words from the comments.
I honestly didn't, but it's interesting that they do come up. No, actually, I'll tell you what, the first thing I looked at was actually my old review, because there were words in there that I know I overused certain words from there, so I pulled some of them out from there. But yeah, there you go. That was Trapped in the Sky.
What fun that was.
It was great fun. Thank you everyone for listening. As I said before, this is a weekly podcast which is live streamed on this here YouTube channel, but then it's also available to catch up later on audio. I'm actually immediately after the show going to be figuring out uploading this to Spotify and doing all of that sort of business, so that will be over there in the Junus, of course. But you can keep up with all the updates of what we're doing on social media if you head over to Blue Sky. I am at Jack Knoll. Ben, what's your username over on Blue Sky and X and anywhere else where they might find you on social media? It's time for you to plug your stuff.
I shall do some plugging. I am on Blue Sky as Ben Wolf Page. You can find me on Twitter at Cinemarionette. Cinemarionette is also the name of my YouTube channel. Please give me a subscribe over there. I make short films with puppets and sometimes videos about things like Thunderbirds as well. If you are interested in Starfleet, I do a security hazard style blog about Starfleet, which is a Thunderbirds inspired show from the 80s. That's starfleetxbomber.substack.com. You can find all the links to everything that I do on the internet. benwolf.page is the site for that. So that's
amazing.
That takes you to everything.
And I dare say Starfleet will be turning up on this podcast from time to time. We of
couldn't-
course did an earlier video on this on YouTube talking about
Yeah.
Starfleet at length, so I'm sure more of that will turn up in this as well.
Yeah.
Do we want to
Stop it.
tease what's coming up next week, or should we say stay tuned to social media?
I do
for that?
want to tease this. I'm just gonna say it is a special, particularly worth, all one word, particularly worth viewing. It is
Special, particularly worth
special,
viewing.
particularly worth viewing.
Okay.
Our next
All
episode.
right. Very cryptic. Very cryptic. I'm sure on social media we'll explain all of that in more detail as time goes
Yes.
on. But
Stay
for
tuned.
now, thank you very much for watching and listening, and we will catch you next week.